The Admiral's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips when the old man sitting across from him quietly said those two words, Ghost 5. In that sterile military conference room, surrounded by polished medals and crisp uniforms, time seemed to stop as the weight of a decades-old secret hung in the air between them. The young officers nearby had no idea they were witnessing a moment that would change everything they thought they knew about heroism, sacrifice, and the ghosts that haunt our nation's most classified missions. It was supposed to be a routine Veterans Appreciation Ceremony at the Pentagon, the kind where distinguished service members shake hands, share war stories, and pose for photographs that would later gather dust in forgotten albums. Admiral Richardson had presided over dozens of these events, each one blending into the next with practiced speeches about honor, duty, and the debt we owe to those who served. But when this particular veteran, a frail man in his 80s with weathered hands and eyes that seemed to hold entire lifetimes of pain, approached him after the ceremony, something felt different. The old man moved with the careful precision of someone who had once commanded respect in the most dangerous places on earth. Yet there was a humility about him that spoke of burdens carried in silence for far too long. "Admiral," the veteran had said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something about Operation Nightfall, something that's been eating at my soul for 43 years." Richardson's blood had chilled at the mention of that name. Operation Nightfall was so classified that even he, with his top-level clearance, knew only fragments of the story. It was one of those missions that lived in the shadows of military history, spoken about only in hushed tones among the highest ranks. An operation so sensitive that most of its details had been buried, along with the men who carried them out. The Admiral had quickly ushered the old man into his private office, away from the curious ears of junior officers and visiting dignitaries. As they sat facing each other across the mahogany desk that had witnessed countless classified briefings, Richardson found himself studying the veteran's face, the deep lines carved by decades of carrying secrets, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of nights spent reliving memories most people couldn't imagine. When the Admiral had asked for his name and call sign, expecting to hear something familiar from the official records, the response had hit him like a physical blow. "Ghost 5, the old man had repeated, and suddenly Richardson understood why this moment felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. According to every official document, every classified report, every piece of intelligence he had ever seen, Ghost 5 had died in the jungles of Southeast Asia in 1979. The entire Ghost Squadron, 5 of the military's most elite operatives, had been declared killed in action, during a mission so black that their families had been told they died in a training accident. For over 4 decades, Ghost 5 had been nothing more than a name on a classified memorial, a hero whose sacrifice was known only to a handful of people with the highest security clearances. Yet here he sat, very much alive, his eyes reflecting the weight of a lifetime spent being dead to the world. "I know what the records say," the veteran continued, his voice growing stronger as he finally began to unburden himself of the truth he had carried alone for so long. "I know my wife was told I died in that helicopter crash during training exercises. I know my children grew up believing their father was a hero who gave his life for his country. But the truth, Admiral, is far more complicated and far more painful than any of us could have imagined." The story that unfolded over the next 2 hours would haunt Richardson for the rest of his life. Ghost 5, whose real name was Colonel Marcus Webb, had indeed been part of Operation Nightfall, a mission designed to extract critical intelligence from behind enemy lines in a conflict that officially never happened. But when their extraction went wrong and the rest of his team was killed, Webb had made a choice that would define the rest of his existence. Wounded and alone in hostile territory, he had allowed himself to be presumed dead, using the cover of his supposed death to continue gathering intelligence that would save countless American lives in future operations. For months, he had lived like a ghost in enemy territory, feeding information back through channels so secret that even his handlers didn't know his true identity. When the mission finally ended, the decision was made at the highest levels of government that Ghost 5 would remain dead. His intelligence network was too valuable, his cover too perfect, his sacrifice too great to be undone by the complications of resurrection. So Marcus Webb had died officially, and a new identity had been born, one that would spend the next 4 decades living in the shadows, watching from afar as his family mourned a father and husband who stood at the back of his own funeral. As the old man's story reached its conclusion, Richardson found himself grappling with emotions he wasn't trained to handle. Here was a man who had given everything, not just his life, but his identity, his family, his very existence, for his country, yet had never received so much as an acknowledgement of his sacrifice. He had watched his children graduate, get married, and have children of their own, all while remaining a ghost at the periphery of their lives, unable to reveal the truth that would shatter the carefully constructed reality they had built around their father's heroic death. "I'm dying now, Admiral," Webb said quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap, like those of a man at peace with his fate. "The doctors give me maybe 6 months, and I find myself wondering if I made the right choice all those years ago. My grandchildren will never know that their grandfather was there, in the shadows, watching over them all this time. They'll never know that the anonymous benefactor who paid for their college educations was the ghost of a man they thought they'd lost before they were even born." In that moment, as the weight of Webb's sacrifice settled over the room like a heavy blanket, Admiral Richardson understood that he was witnessing something far more profound than a simple confession. This was the final act of a man who had spent his entire adult life serving his country in ways that could never be recognized, never be celebrated, never even be acknowledged. The true heroes, he realized, weren't always the ones whose names were carved in marble monuments or whose stories were told in history books. Sometimes they were the ghosts who chose to remain dead so that others might live, the shadows who sacrificed their very existence for the greater good. As Ghost 5 quietly stood to leave, his mission finally complete after 4 decades of silence, Admiral Richardson knew that some stories are too important to remain buried forever, even if they can never be fully told.